So, Marvel's Black Widow is finally coming out soon, signaling the start of Marvel's Phase 4 on the big screen. It's been nearly 2 years to date without an MCU film in theaters, the longest break by far since the modern Marvel Cinematic Universe first kicked off back in 2008. So while we're not so patiently waiting these last few days for Black Widow's release, I wanted to take a look back at all of the previous 23 movies from Phase 1, 2, and 3 and rank them all. This is my ranking of all the films in the Infinity Saga. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Brandon and this is Film Flare, where we discuss anything and everything that makes film and television great. So be sure to subscribe and let's talk about some great movies. Now I'm going to be breaking this up into 4 different categories. First off, we've got the relegation. It's my bottom 5 of the list. Then we've got the midfield. 10 solid movies that weren't terrible, but just didn't do enough to really rise above the rest. Next up, we've got the contenders. Top 10 movies that just missed out on being the top 5. And then finally, my top 5 films will be crowned. So without further delay, let's get into it. First up, relegation. Now, some film has to have the honor of being the bottom of the list, and for me, it's Thor: The Dark World. I honestly don't think anyone is gonna fight over me about this one. For the life of me, I can't even remember what this movie was about. But it did introduce the Reality Stone, so it did something right. Just not enough to avoid the bottom of the barrel. At number 22, I put Iron Man 3. This movie was utterly useless in the saga and really just a cash grab for the studio. At number 21, I put the original Thor. It started off as an interesting Shakespearean drama wrapped up in mystical worlds. But then it decided to spend almost all of its time in a small town in Arizona. But it's not the worst Marvel film I've seen. Next up, at number 20, I put Ant-Man and the Wasp. I don't really think of this as a superhero film. It's mainly just businessmen trying to screw each other over and another girl who just wants to live. I think this movie would have been just as fun without the superhero elements. So in this ranking of superhero movies, I just can't put it that high. And at number 19, top of the regulation, goes Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This movie essentially boiled down to sure, it did answer an important question for its main character, but I really can't get on board with how they did it. Okay, now it's time for the midfield. These are movies that I did think were good, but really just didn't stand out in any particular way, or simply got outdone by other movies. At number 19, I put Iron Man 2. I think this is where Marvel committed to the idea of a cinematic universe and really got serious about it. At number 17, the original Ant-Man. I'm also not really convinced that this was a superhero movie either. It's a thief committing crimes on behalf of a businessman who wants to screw over his ex-partner who screwed him over first. But there was that small element of I'm gonna protect the world by not letting this technology out into it, but that really took a back seat for me. But Paul Rudd is nevertheless one of my favorite MCU characters. Next up, Captain Marvel. I actually thought this was a good movie, but the story just wasn't compelling enough as it should have been for me. At number 15 was Captain America: The First Avenger. This movie was utterly ridiculous to me, but so was the patriotic superhero created in a wartime shown punching Hitler in the face as part of the propaganda machine. Now the next 2 spots, 14 and 13, are a bit interchangeable for me, and that's both of the Spider-Man movies. Far From Home was the perfect bookend to the Infinity Saga. It was a little bit depressing to me with most of the movie focusing on everything that was going wrong and Peter's inability to properly deal with it. But honestly, in his situation, we'd probably all be in the exact same boat. And it did end with a hopeful note, so it was still a really good movie. And it was nearly impossible for Marvel to get Spider-Man Homecoming wrong. After a few decades and a couple of reboots, Spider-Man had such a low bar set for it. And with over a dozen MCU films already under its belt, this was a cakewalk for Marvel to get right. It skipped all of the unnecessary backstory and getting his powers part and gets right into the heart of the character. Just a regular kid torn between being a hero and being a kid.
I don't need training wheels. Just again treating me like a kid all the time. It's not cool.
But you are a kid.
They each try to do different things with the same character in different phases of his growth, and I really liked them both. Now, just in front of them at number 12, I put The Incredible Hulk. This movie is honestly more than a bit underrated in my opinion, and I think it deserves more credit than it gets. I think this is actually the MCU film that I've actually watched the most, no matter how much everyone tries to discredit it. And topping the midfield at number 11 was Avengers Age of Ultron. The best part about this movie was the twins and Barton. Their interactions alone made this whole movie worth watching. We also get the creation of Vision, which is super important moving forward in the MCU. Not to mention that amazing Hulkbuster fight. Now, before we get into my top 10 favorite movies of the MCU so far, I'd like to make an honorable mention, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Yes, I know this isn't technically part of the MCU with the C standing for cinematic, but this show was heavily involved in the universe, featuring character crossovers such as Maria Hill, Lady Sif, Nick Fury, and not to mention Phil Coulson, the center of the show. It also tied into major events from the MCU throughout its seasons, such as The Dark World, Age of Ultron, The Winter Soldier, and Civil War. This show just never got the love it really deserved from Marvel throughout its 7-season run. Now back to the movies. The runner-ups. Slotting in at number 10, we've got Black Panther. While no doubt important for the MCU, introducing the Black Panther was more important for audiences around the world to see their first superhero of color. And I do think that it had one of the best villains to ever show in the MCU. So much so that I've actually made another video almost solely dedicated to that villain. I'll link it below if you're interested. But just in front of that, at number 9, is Avengers Endgame. Time travel is always fun, especially when you get to reimagine some iconic MCU scenes from different perspectives. But let's be honest, this movie only existed for the nostalgia in that awesome final battle scene with a couple of self-sacrifices that hit you right in the feels.
And I am Iron Man.
At number 8, we've got Guardians of the Galaxy, a fun team-up movie with a sentient tree and a talking raccoon. The plot wasn't great, but the characters involved and story it told really made up for it. At number 7, Iron Man. This isn't the first movie of this universe, but it is the one that really set it all off. And it's also one of my favorite origin stories. It wasn't really about the superpowers or saving the world, but really just a man trying to right his own wrongs.
I shouldn't be alive. Unless it was for a reason. I just finally know what I have to do.
And just ahead of it at number 6 is another movie more about the person rather than the hero. Captain America: The Winter Soldier. It's mostly about a black and white man who finds himself living in a world full of shades of gray. It was really fun to see Steve grow up and mature in this movie. Overall, we also just get the most growth out of the most characters. From Steve realizing the world has changed but not straying too far from his morals, to Sam getting back into the fight, to Natasha figuring out what kind of person she really wants to be. It's the most story-filled MCU film to date, and I'm really hoping Black Widow steps that up even more.
You don't know everything about me. I've lived a lot of lives.
Now we're on to the top 5, the best of the best MCU films to date. First up, Civil War. This is really just Avengers 2.5, with both sides playing the heroes and the villains. I felt like each character had a really solid reasoning for whatever side they chose. I don't want to get into which side was right or wrong, but I do want to hear your guys' thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. But either way, this movie did a lot with enough characters to preview the next big Avengers showdown, even introducing a couple more to fill out the ranks. And the dramatic scenes were just as impactful as the action ones were entertaining. At number 4, I put Doctor Strange. I feel like this movie was Marvel just testing the audience to see how many visual effects they could cram into a single movie. But it did make my eyes happy. And some of the sequences gave me an idea of what it would be like if Marvel let Christopher Nolan direct one of their movies. At number 3, the original Avengers. Let's be honest, nobody really hates this movie. Every character was great, the action was amazing, and it was just a ton of fun to see all of these separate characters interacting with each other for the first time.
Yeah, big man in a suit of armor. Take that off, what are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Now, the top 2 films on my list are really close. So close that if you ask me tomorrow, my answers may just change. But for now, in the number 2 spot, Infinity War. With nearly 10 years building up to one film, this movie was a success before it was ever released. And it didn't disappoint at all. But in the number 1 spot, if you've been paying attention, is none other than Thor Ragnarok.
Yes!
This film may be the most comic booky in all of the MCU, and I think that's what made it so enjoyable. It doesn't have to worry about being realistic or relatable. It just tells a great story that's meaningful to all of the characters involved and doesn't really worry about too much of the rest. I've been a big fan of Taika Waititi for years, and this film really exemplifies why. It's not only my favorite Thor story, but also kicks off my favorite character trilogy in the whole MCU. Well, there you have it. That is my ranking of all of the films of the Infinity Saga. I'll stand by my choices, but let me know why I'm wrong in the comments below. And while you're there, please do give this a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. We've got new videos coming out every Tuesdays and Fridays. But until next time, have a great day, and don't forget to watch a great movie. Bye.